Her expression changed dramatically. "Yes, I would really appreciate it." "Hello, Ben. What's up?" John whipped out his phone and gave Ben a ring. "I need to see you at my place right now." "There's been a change of plan," he said. John ended the call and escorted Jenny to her car, telling her, "Follow me. I'm in that SUV over there." He then drove to his apartment, making sure Jenny stayed behind him the whole way. Although his place isn't as nice as yours, he assured her that it's home and that it's perfect, Father. As they sat down at his table, Jenny asked, "Where's this evidence?" He responded, "Are you really sure you want to see this? It's pretty graphic." Jenny accepted his offer of coffee, so he brewed a cup and let her choose the flavor. Her face went white when John retrieved the footage showing Dan, Robert, and Lydia plotting to shoot him, followed by the actual shooting, and she exclaimed, "As I mentioned before, I must view this." "Oh my God," she exclaimed as the videos came to a close, "I can't believe they actually plotted to murder you by then." Tears streamed down her cheeks. The door was pounded by Ben. After he sat down, Jenny recognized me, so I was able to explain what was going on since JN let him in and introduced him to Jenny. In response to John's statement, "I can't sit here and let that go on," Ben nodded and said, "I understand." John continued, "So you think it's time to ramp things up," to which JN responded, "Yes, I do." After Ben paused to collect his thoughts, he turned to Jenny and asked, "Would you be willing to help us?" Jenny responded, "Oh yes, anything I can do to help. Maybe she can install some cameras and let us keep an eye on her house?" "I don't want her to be in any danger," Ben told John, adding, "We could use an extra pair of eyes and ears at the Wilson house." "Jenny, would you be open to doing that if John told you she wouldn't be?" What did John want to know? Jenny agreed wholeheartedly, saying, "Well, I'm an adult now, and I'd like to pitch in, and you can't stop me, Dad." She emphasized the dad and said, "I've been taking self-defense classes for the past several months. I threatened Robert that I would kick his balls up into his throat if he touched me again. Since then, Robert has refrained from touching me, and John felt a surge of pride at his daughter's declaration that she was undeniably his girl." After Ben promised to provide the necessary equipment and instructions, he glanced over at John and asked, "Maybe it's time to contact the media. I'll set up an interview and get back to you. Is there anyone we can trust at the district attorney's office?" To which B shook his head in disapproval. "A lot has changed in the past decade, according to John B. As much as I'd like to see all three of them hanged, the reality is they'll drag it out in the courts for years and there's no guarantee anything will ever be done. With that said, we are left with no choice but to deal with the current situation." "Okay, set up the interview, I'll keep doing what I've been doing, maybe we can force them to participate," John suggested. Ben countered that the people in the East don't care much about publicity. John understood this, hated the idea, but recognized it could be their best chance. "Look at Jenny. You did exactly what Ben said, you set up those cameras. And please, don't hesitate to call me or Ben at the first sign of danger. If anything happens, you can always stay here and we'll help you out." John embraced his daughter and exclaimed, "I'm so proud of you, Jenny," as if tears were about to fall from his eyes as he and Jenny shook heads and said, "All right, let's roll." Jenny beamed as she planted a peck on her father's cheek. She whispered, "I love you, Dad." He responded, "I love you, too, Princess." The days that followed were a complete wash. Jenny followed Ben's orders and installed microphones and cameras throughout the house, even the house phones were hardwired. John's campaign of calls and messages drove Lydia and Robert even closer to the edge. John found out that Robert and Leah had used the restroom in secret because Ben and John were always watching. More evidence was gathered by Ben and Jenny against Robert and Lydia, including phone conversations with the mysterious individuals who were supporting Robert's campaign, which raised suspicions. Ben collected and analyzed all the video and phone calls, sorting out the daily fluff from the important stuff. He also met with a reporter he knew and trusted at the Los Angeles Times, and she reached out to John. "John Smith," he said when his phone rang. "Mr. Smith, this is Elizabeth Johnson from the Times. I spoke with a friend of yours and he says you have a story for me. Can we speak sometime soon? Sure, I also have some video to show you if you're interested. Yes, I'm very interested, she said. Can you come by this afternoon? Yes, I can be there this afternoon. What time? John asked. They agreed to meet at a conference room at the paper's office at 2 p.m. that afternoon. Before ending the call, John looked at his watch. He had a little more than an hour to get there, so he grabbed his things and headed out. He finally found a place to park and made his way to the conference room, where he met Elizabeth. She looked to be about his age, with short blonde hair. She looked good even in her professional attire. JN naturally looked at her fingers and saw no wedding or engagement rings. He reached out to her. "Miss Johnson," he asked. She smiled and took his hand. "Please, call me Liz," she said. "Come in and have a seat. Can I get you something? Coffee? Latte?" "Coffee is always welcome," he said with a smile. Liz pressed a button on the intercom and ordered 2 cups of coffee to be delivered. "Ben Jacobs tells me you have a story about Robert Wilson, and from what he tells me, it sounds quite interesting," she said. John nodded his head. "Liz, how much do you know about the shooting death of his brother Avery?" John asked. "As I recall, the official report is that he was killed during a home invasion," she said. "Are you saying that's not accurate? Let me show you a couple of videos, and I'll let you decide. Then I'll tell you my story if you're still interested. And I have to warn you, these videos are quite graphic," John said. "Is that okay?" "Sure," she said. As John booted up his laptop, he navigated to the folder and showed her the video of Robert, Dan, and Lydia plotting to murder him, then showed her the video of the shooting itself. After they ended, Liz sat in her chair, shocked. "Well, what do you think?" JN asked. "Are you interested?" "Absolutely, I'm interested," she said. "How did you get these videos?" "I'll explain, but first I want to know how much of this is on the record," JN asked. "If there's something you want kept off the record, just tell me," she said. John thought for a moment. "Okay, Liz," John said. "Ben says he trusts you, and that's good enough for me. This part is definitely off the record. Officially, Avery Wilson died 10 years ago. John Smith, me, spent 10 years in a coma as a result of that shooting. I was Avery Wilson. The feds arranged the new identity and would have put Avery in protective custody. For whatever reason, their case went cold and nothing came of it, but Avery remains dead as far as the world is concerned. Are you with me so far?" "Yes," Liz said. "You know I'm going to have to vet this before anything is published. I'll definitely have to get these videos analyzed," she said. "I understand," John said. "If you check your public records, you'll see that Avery, that is me, filed for divorce in December 2008, and the papers were served on Christmas. The shooting happened shortly after the first of the year. You should also find an agreement proposed by Robert and his father, who were acting as Lydia's attorneys." He went on to tell Liz his story, stopping only when he came to a part he wanted kept off the record. "Let me show you one more thing," John said, pulling out the DNA test Jenny had done on him. He showed it to Liz, who understood what the paper said. "Oh my God," she said. "You really are Avery Wilson. Or were Avery Wilson. Look, there's a lot more to this story. Would you be open to discussing it over dinner?" John asked. Liz smiled. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it for a while, and I'll call." "Okay, sounds good, Liz," he said. "I look forward to hearing from you." They said their goodbyes, and John left for home. The next day, he got a call from Liz. "Mr. Smith, I hope this isn't too short notice, but I'd like to take you up on that offer of dinner." "Sure," John said. "Where would you like to go?" "Well, there's a political meet and greet with some of the candidates, including Robert," she said. "I'm even going to get a chance to ask some questions. Are you still interested?" "Sounds interesting," John said. Sure, give me the details, and I'll pick you up. After Liz gave him the information he needed, he called Ben to let him know. Are you nuts? Ben asked. It'll be fine, John said. I'm dead, remember? You just be careful and let Liz ask the questions, got me? Ben asked. Yeah, got it, JN said. JN called his daughter to give her a heads up that he would be there with Liz. Thanks for letting me know, she said. I'll be there as well. Of course, so I'll act like we've never met, he said. Thanks, John said. Later, he put on his best suit and picked Liz up at her apartment. She looked ravishing in her evening gown. You look gorgeous, he said when she opened the door. She smiled. Thank you, sir. And you look rather dapper yourself. They arrived at the event and mingled with the line heading into the dinner. Liz handed her invitation, which included her +1, to the doorman who waved them in. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny were close to the door, shaking hands with everyone who came in. John held his breath, hoping that neither Lydia nor Robert would recognize him. Robert reached out to Liz as she came up to him. Good evening, Miss Johnson, he said as he took her hand. So good to see you. And I see you brought a friend, he added, reaching out to John. John thought he would lose it but took a breath and shook Robert's hand. And you are, he asked. Smith. John Smith, John told him. He glanced down and noticed that Robert was wearing the Rolex watch Lydia had given him that fateful Christmas. Good to meet you, Mr. Smith. This is my wife, Lydia, and my daughter, Jenny, he added. John nodded to Lydia and Jenny. Jenny smiled politely, and Lydia looked at him strangely. She didn't look too good, John thought. Wrinkles were appearing around her eyes and mouth, and she looked tired and thin, too thin. John thought that maybe she recognized him but shrugged the thought off. Mrs. Wilson, Miss Wilson, he said perfunctorily before moving on. John and Liz made their way to the place reserved for them and sat down, introducing themselves to the others at the table. He leaned into Liz. That watch he's wearing is the one Lydia gave him 10 years ago, he whispered. Oh, really? She asked. Interesting. The dinner went well, or as well as a rubber chicken political dinner can go. John choked down his food and engaged in light conversation with others at the table. He glanced at Robert periodically and saw Jenny checking him out. He wasn't sure, but he thought he saw her give him a thumbs up. He smiled and turned back to his dinner. Finally, the dinner portion of the event was over, and the MC introduced the candidates at the dais. Robert was the first candidate to address the crowd. After giving his standard stump speech about bringing accountability back to Sacramento, the floor was open for journalists to ask questions. Liz had her hand up and was picked first. She stood and introduced herself. Elizabeth Johnson, Los Angeles Times, she said. This is your first time on the political scene, and we don't know that much about you, Mr. Wilson. Can you tell us how close you were to your brother, Officer Avery Wilson? Thank you for asking, Miss Johnson, he said. My brother and I were very close, always had been. His death hit us all very hard. I see, Liz said. And you married your brother's widow shortly after his funeral 10 years ago, right? That's correct, he said. So, can you please explain to us why your brother named both you and your father in his divorce from his wife, which, by the way, was filed less than a month before his shooting? Liz asked. Audible gasps were heard throughout the venue. That was 10 years ago, Miss Johnson, Robert said nervously. My brother suffered from a form of paranoia, perhaps as a result of his military service. I don't know why he would have done that. But the divorce paperwork showed a proposal put forth by both you and your father that would have stripped Officer Wilson of his rights as a husband, Liz said. Can you please explain that? And is it normal for two senior members of a law firm to take on a basic divorce like this? I don't recall such a proposal, Robert said. As for representing Lydia, we did it as a benefit to her for her years of loyal service to us. He looked around the room. Next, he called out before Liz could ask another question. He pointed to a man 2 tables over from Liz. "Brad Williams, Orange County Register," he said. "Can you please answer Miss Johnson's question? Were you having an affair with your brother's wife at the time of the shooting?" More gasps were heard in the room. John saw Lydia look down at her plate when the question was asked. "That's an outrageous accusation," Robert said. "I thought the world of my brother. I loved him. No one was more sad to hear of his death than I. At the time of the shooting, your firm was under investigation by federal authorities for allegations of ties with organized crime. Can you please tell us what happened to that investigation?" Brad asked. "We were cleared of all allegations, and the case was closed," Robert said. Next, he pointed to another woman a few tables away. "Jane Holliday, KYTV News," she said. "As I recall, the FBI never fully closed the case. They just said they couldn't find any conclusive evidence to back up the claims. Isn't that correct?" "The result was the same as far as we're concerned," Robert said. "If there was anything to the charges, my father would never have been selected for his seat on the court." John could see that Robert was clearly nervous. The MC got up and ended the question and answer session before introducing the next candidate. "I don't think he did himself any favors," John whispered to Liz. She smiled and nodded her head. "I think you're right," she said. "You might want to check the evening news when you get home tonight." A couple of hours later, the event ended, and everyone got up to leave. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny made a beeline for the door but were intercepted by John and Liz. "Mr. Wilson," John said, extending his hand. Robert stopped and shook his hand. "I couldn't help but notice your watch. That's a mighty nice piece. May I have a look, please?" Robert took it off and handed it to him. John examined it and turned it over, showing Liz the inscription on the back, which was just as he had described it to her the previous day. He handed it back to Robert. "I knew someone who had a watch very much like that," John said. He looked at Lydia. "You must love your husband a great deal to give something like that." Lydia smiled. "Yes, I do, Mr." She began. "Smith." "John Smith," John said. "Good to meet you folks. Please have a pleasant evening." He nodded to Jenny, who was smiling. Robert put his arm around Lydia, and the three of them left quickly. John and Liz watched them leave. "I think you just got your story, JN, Liz said. John nodded as he turned to Liz. "I think so," he said, picking up Liz's sweater. "Now that this is over, would you care to go somewhere nice, maybe have a real dinner?" She smiled. "I'd love to, John, but I have to get home and get this story filed so it can get in the morning paper," she said. "I understand," JN said. Liz turned to John as he pulled up in front of her apartment complex. "John, I want you to know that I looked at your old police record. I wasn't trying to pry, but I had to know what kind of man you are, or were. According to your record, you were a no-nonsense cop who took no guff from anyone," she said. "But what I saw tonight was something different," she said. "I was very impressed with the restraint you showed. It couldn't have been easy seeing your wife and daughter with the man who shot you." "No, it wasn't," JN said. "I am hoping to build a relationship with my daughter, though." Liz nodded. "I understand. She's quite beautiful and looks a lot like you. Listen, if you don't mind, I'd like to make this up to you." "How do you like country and western?" she asked. "I love it," John said. "Good," she said, smiling. "I know just the place. You can take me a week from this Friday if you're up to it. They serve cold beer and the best burgers in town, and they have line dancing. You do have a pair of jeans and cowboy boots, right?" "I think I can scare some up by then," he said. "If you don't mind teaching me this line dancing thing. I've been asleep the last 10 years, you know." "Pick me up at, say, 6:30, she asked. John smiled. "It's a date," he said. He got out of the car, opened the door for Liz, and walked her to her apartment. She opened the door, then turned and gave him a light kiss on the cheek. I'll see you a week from Friday, cowboy, she said before going inside. Sleep tight, as she closed the door. John felt like a schoolboy who just got his first date. He practically skipped and jumped as he headed back to his car, a smile on his face. He drove home and immediately turned on the evening news. It took a while, but the local news networks played excerpts of the night's event. Tonight, several candidates for state office held a meet and greet with members of the press to introduce themselves, the news announcer said. Attorney Robert Wilson was grilled over his relationship with his brother, slain police officer Avery Wilson, and the officer's widow, who is now his wife. Video showed a very nervous and agitated Robert deflecting questions being thrown at him. John smiled. This was not a good night for Robert at all. At one point, Wilson was confronted with an allegation that he may have been having an affair with his brother's wife, who was served with divorce papers less than a month before the tragic shooting, the announcer added. Wilson denied the charge, saying he loved his brother. His phone rang when the report ended. Picking up his phone, he noticed the call was from Jenny. "Hey, Princess," he said when he answered the phone. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Who was the hottie you were with tonight?" "Her name is Liz," he said. "She's a reporter. I take it you approve?" "Absolutely," Jenny said. "Well, I have a real date with her a week from this Friday," John said. "Good for you. By the way, Mom and Robert are about to explode. They're beyond pissed over the questions he got asked. They've been on the phone with reporters ever since they got home. I don't know what you did, but you sure got under his skin," John laughed. "Yeah, he didn't look like he was having a good time," John said. "I'm just glad I was able to get so close to them without being recognized." "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing okay," Jenny said. "Look, I have to go now. I have school tomorrow, but I'll be in touch. Love you." "Love you too, Princess," he said. "Be careful." They ended the call, but John's phone rang again. This time, it was Ben. "Hey buddy," Ben said. "Saw Robert on the evening news. He didn't look very good up there at all. Liz really got him on the defensive." "Yes, she did," John said. "I think your idea about going to the media was a good one. Any news on your end?" "We have some interesting video from their house, and we've captured several calls from reporters," Ben said. "There was another call from your father, and he wasn't happy at all with the way Robert handled things." "I'm not surprised," John said. "Jenny tells me they're beyond pissed." "Well, I've got a couple of things developing here, so I'll get with you later," Ben said. "I think his performance just captured the attention of his backers, if you know what I mean." John knew exactly what Ben meant, and he knew it wouldn't be good for Robert either. John spent the rest of the week doing what he had been doing, sending little notes and calls to harass Robert and Lydia, all with the hopes of pushing them over the edge. He also spent some time buying new jeans and cowboy boots for his date with Liz. Jenny had some time after school one day and went with him. "I think someone's going to get lucky," she told her father as he modeled his new boots for her. He laughed. "You really think Liz will go for an old fella like me?" he asked. "Old, please," Jenny said. "You're in great shape and you're damn good looking. She's crazy if she doesn't fall for you. You're a great catch." "I'm glad you think so, Princess," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing good," she said. "Robert's left me alone ever since all this started. He and Mom aren't doing too good, though. All they do is fight and argue. I'm thinking it's time to up our game a bit," John said. "I'll talk to Ben and Liz and see what they think." Jenny nodded her head. "You're right, Dad," she said. "They're awful nervous about something. I'm wondering if it's time to bring up your issues with Robert." "Would you be comfortable with that?" he asked. Jenny thought for a moment before answering. "I'm never comfortable with it, but I know it'll have to be dealt with at some point," she said. "Would you be okay if I mention it to Liz and have her talk about it with you?" he asked. "Yeah, I suppose," she said nervously. "I trust you, Dad." Do what you think is best, okay? Just don't do anything stupid, okay, sweetie, John said. His heart ached for her, and he wanted so bad to rip Robert's tool off and feed it to the dogs for what he did to his little girl. After Jenny left for home, he got a call from Liz. "Hi John," she said as he answered. "I just wanted to let you know that our tech people have analyzed the video you gave me and they say they're both legit. I've run it by my editor and he's curious to see what I can come up with. Do you have more video or information you can share with me?" "Yes, I do," JN said. "Do you want to meet for lunch or something? There's another aspect of this I haven't shared with you yet, and it's very sensitive." "Yeah, sure. Can we meet in about an hour?" "I'll text you the address," Liz said. "Sounds good," JN said. "I just need to run home and grab my laptop." "All right," Liz said. "I'll see you then." After getting the address, John headed home, grabbed his laptop, and went to a meatless, she said, a nice bistro with outdoor seating. John spotted her instantly. She smiled as he took his seat across from her. "Good to see you again," he said. "You too, cowboy," she said. "What have you got for me?" "Well, the first thing is an issue with Jenny, my daughter, by the way. She knows who I am and we've been spending some time together getting reacquainted. She's quite a remarkable girl." "That's good that you're getting to know her again," Liz said. "What's going on with her?" "She told me that Robert has been molesting her sexually since she was about 13. He said." Liz looked at him, shocked. "Oh my God, has she called 911 or done anything?" "Yeah, she says she called 911 twice, but her mother was able to lie their way out of it," he said. "According to Jenny, they threatened her if she called 911 again." "We've got to get her out of there," Liz said. John nodded his head. "I know we do, but she's now over 18 and almost out of high school. She'll be going to UCLA in the fall. She plans to stay there. Right now, she's biding her time at home. We've got their whole house wired for both audio and video, and we'll catch it if anything happens. But I'm torn. Part of me wants to get her out now, but if I do that, I'll end up exposing her and myself to even more danger. These people play for keeps, and they'd have no problem killing her as well as me. I have a second bedroom," Liz said. "She can come stay with me if she wants to. Would you like me to talk to her? Would you mind?" John asked. "I think she needs to talk to another woman, someone who can see her point of view." Liz nodded. "I'd love to talk to her. Would you arrange it, please?" "The sooner, the better," Liz said. John nodded his head and pulled out his phone. "How about now if I can arrange it?" he asked. "That would be great," she said. John called his daughter, and she picked up after the second ring. "Hey Dad." "Hello, Princess. Can you meet with me and Liz right now?" he asked. "Wow," she said. "Where are you at?" John gave her the address. "Yeah, I'm not too far from there. I just finished up my self-defense class, and I can be there in about 15 minutes. "Okay, we'll wait for you," John said. "We're sitting outside in the back." After ending the call, he looked at Liz. "She can be here in 15 minutes. Is that okay?" he asked. "Sure," Liz said. "It'd be nice to have another woman in the place for a while." "Oh," John asked. "Yeah, my daughter lived with me after my divorce. My ex couldn't keep it in his pants, and I caught him one time too many. He left, and she stayed. Then she got killed by a drunk driver. She was only 16 at the time." "I'm sorry to hear that," John said. "I didn't know you had any kids." "Yeah, I did. So, I know how you're feeling right now. You want to rip Robert's tool off and shove it down his throat, don't you?" John nodded. "I've thought about it a time or two," he said. "Well, don't do anything stupid," she told him. "You have a daughter who needs her dad, and I have to confess that I kind of like you too." She smiled. "What, me?" he asked. "I'm an old man." She shook her head. "Not hardly," she said. "I'll bet you're not more than 2 or 3 years older than me." No way, I'm 47. You can't be more than what, 35, he smiled. Thanks for the compliment. I'm actually 44, but don't tell anyone, okay, she said. Okay, your secret is safe with me, he told her. Just remember, John Smith, you may be able to rip Robert's head off, and God knows you have every right to, but there's an old saying about not arguing with someone who buys their ink by the barrel, she said. Do what you must, but don't cross the line. Thanks for the reminder, he said. By the way, did you remember to bring more video? She asked. Yes, I did, he said, pulling up his laptop. This is all pretty graphic stuff, by the way. He copied the files to a thumb drive and handed it to her. Use what you want. Thanks, she said. Just then, Jenny joined them at the table. John stood and offered her a seat. He introduced the two women. I saw you at the dinner the other night, Jenny said. I love the way you nailed Robert. Thanks, Liz said. She looked at John. You want to take a stroll, Dad, so Jenny and I can talk girl talk for a bit. John held up his hands and stood. I'll let you two have at it, he said. He kissed Jenny on the cheek. If you need to, she said. What are you going to tell your mother? John asked. Nothing really, Jenny said, only that I'll be staying with a friend for a while. I'm over 18 now, so there's nothing she can do to stop me. She looked at Liz and her father and wondered what life with the two of them would be like. Thank you both so much for everything, she said. She looked at Liz. I'll see you this evening, okay? Liz nodded her head. I'll see you, she said. You have the key I gave you, right? Got it right here, Jenny said before leaving. By now, I can't tell you how much this means to me, Jan said after Jenny left. Especially since we just met. Liz took his hand. My gut instincts are usually right, John, she said, and right now, my gut is telling me to trust you. You've been hurt real bad, and a part of me wants to help you, and who knows what'll come of it. John nodded his head in understanding. But remember what I told you earlier, do what you have to with Robert and Lydia, but don't cross the line. I understand, he said. Liz grabbed his hand and looked at him hard. Promise me, she said. I promise, John told her. She nodded her head. I'm going to hold you to that. Well, I have to get going. I have to get ready for my new house guest, she said. I'll also see what I can find out about those 911 calls. If Jenny called, there's going to be a record of it. I'll let you know what I find, okay? Okay, sounds good, Liz. John said after Liz left. John received a call from Ben. What's up, Ben? Got a few minutes? Ben asked. John answered in the affirmative. I need you to come by and check something out. There's been a very interesting phone call. I'll be right there, John said, hanging up. He left the bistro after paying the bill and headed to Ben's office. He went straight into Ben's office when he got there. Ben looked up from his computer. John, I want you to hear this. Turning his laptop around, John sat down and looked at the screen. Ben had video up as well as audio from the call and had apparently been able to synthesize the two. The video showed Robert in his office answering his phone. Wilson, he said. Bobby, exclaimed the man at the other end of the call. Tony, Robert said. Long time no hear, how's it hanging, buddy? Bobby, what's this I'm reading about your campaign? Hey, the man said in a distinctive New York accent. I don't know what you mean, Tony, Robert said. Some reporter from the Times hit me with some old, out of the blue. I thought we had that issue with your brother taken care of a long time ago, Tony said. I did too, Robert said. Look, Bobby, Mario's not too pleased right now. You know how he feels about loose ends, right? You need to get this under control, Tony, Robert said. We've got a boatload of cash going into your campaign, and we can't afford to have you screw it up. I understand, Tony, Robert said. Maybe I should take care of that reporter from the Times. What, you planning to whack some reporter chick for doing her job? Tony asked. Are you nuts? You know everyone with a blog is writing about this. What, are you going to whack every blogger on the planet? What, are you stupid? Look, Tony, tell Mario I'll meet with that reporter and see if we can't get it tamped down a bit, okay? Papers are going to write what they want, you know that, Robert said. I'll tell him, but you'd better get a handle on this. You understand me, Tony? You know how Mario believes in being thorough, you catch my drift? Tony asked. I'll take care of it, Tony, no problem, Robert said, clearly nervous. Make sure you do, Bobby, Tony warned, because the next time, there won't be any phone call. Understand? Got it, Tony. I'll take care of it, Robert said. The call ended, and Robert's face went white. He sat back and took a drink as the video ended. Ben looked at John. Well, sounds like his supporters back east aren't thrilled with him right now, John said. Robert looked like he was going to pass out. It's worse than you know, Ben said. I think the man Tony referred to, Mario, is none other than Mario Silva, one of if not the most feared crime bosses in the country. I've heard that he's been trying to get people elected across the country to help him with his various projects, which are just fronts for their criminal activities. Are you thinking we should maybe let them take care of Robert and Sylvia? John asked. I think that if we're careful to feed the media just enough to get them interested in Robert's activities and background, they might just take care of them for us, he said. This Silva character is a criminal of the highest order, but he's generally thought of as a very loyal and dedicated family man. Isn't Silva the guy the feds were looking into when I was shot? John asked. Why not hand this over to the feds? Yes, he was. Personally, I don't know if the feds can find their own a-holes right now. The way they botched this up 9 or 10 years ago doesn't give me any confidence. I wouldn't be surprised if Silva had someone embedded in the FBI at the time. Why don't we do a deep dive into all the old videos we have and see if there's any reference to Mario or any of his cronies? John suggested. I think you may be onto something there, Ben said. If they actually had ties to Silva, surely they'd talk about it. Hell, they openly discussed murdering you. Let's get started on that, okay? Sure, JN said. By the way, how's things with Liz? Ben asked, looking good. We have a date coming up, and Jenny's going to stay with her, at least until she starts at Y. A wide smile on Ben's face. Good, he said. Liz is a good woman, and she'll do you right. Just don't screw it up with her. I'm curious, John said, why didn't you go after Liz? I would, except that incest is a felony in California, Ben said. She is my sister. The guy she was married to was a cheating louse who couldn't keep his tool in his pants. She went through hell when her daughter was killed. You take good care of her, you hear me? John smiled. Count on it, my friend, he said. John left and headed home, confident that things were finally starting to turn around for him. The next day, he went to Liz's apartment for dinner, looking forward to the evening with the girls. Jenny answered the door when he knocked, wearing a pair of cutoffs and a t-shirt. Liz looked good as well, and also wore a pair of denim cutoffs. He checked out her shapely legs and felt a familiar stirring in his groin. Well, have a seat, Liz said as she dished up a nice lasagna. John's mouth watered as he smelled the food before him. Liz insisted they say grace before the meal and asked John to lead them in giving thanks, which he did. For the first time in a decade, he felt like he was at home. John had 2 helpings of lasagna along with seconds on the green beans Liz had prepared. The girls smiled to themselves as they watched him eat. This was the first home-cooked meal he had eaten in 10 years, and he savored every bite. Finally satisfied, he sat back and looked at Liz. That was the best lasagna I think I've ever had, he said. Thank you so much, Liz. You're welcome, cowboy, she said. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think we might even have enough left for tomorrow, if you're interested. I most definitely am, he said. He turned to Jenny. Have you heard from your mom or Robert? He asked. Yeah, she called me earlier and wanted to know where I would be staying. I just told her I'm staying with a friend. She wasn't too happy about it, but I told her I'm 18 and I can stay where I want. I don't think she'll be bothering me anymore. John nodded his head. Good. Any news on your end, Liz? He asked. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did some digging and was able to get the 911 calls Jenny made. I listened to them and looked up the record of the home visits. Jenny was right. Somehow, Lydia and Robert managed to convince them that nothing had happened. She looked at Jenny, who was uncomfortable with the subject. I think Jenny and I should discuss it more later this evening. Are you okay with that? She asked Jenny. Yeah, I think so, she said. Good, Liz said. And what about you? She asked, looking at John. Well, we got some interesting audio of a call between Robert and a crony of some gangster back east. We believe that Mario DVA is the one behind Robert's campaign, and he's not too happy about the way things are going, John said. Isn't Silva the one the FBI thought your father was involved with? Liz asked. I believe so. Ben and I are going through all the videos we have to see if we can find any mention of Silva or anyone in his organization. I've spent a good part of the day doing that, but so far, I haven't found anything yet. You know there's software that can do that, right? Liz asked. John shook his head. No, I didn't remember. I've been out of the loop for a while. Do you have something like that at the paper? He asked. Liz laughed. I have something like that right here at home, she said. I use it to transcribe audio to text all the time. It's not 100% foolproof, and I usually have to go back through the output to fix errors, but it's a lot faster than trying to type as I listen. How much are we talking about? There's probably hundreds of hours of video, I think, JN said. Well, bring it over, and I'll get started. On it. I can help with that if it's okay, Jenny said. John and Liz agreed, just so long as your homework gets done first, JN said, smiling. Speaking of which, I have some studying to get done, so if you guys don't mind, I'll get started, okay? Sure, dear, John said. Jenny got up, kissed her father and Liz on the cheek, and headed to her room. Liz waited for her to close the door before she spoke. Your daughter is a wonderful girl, Liz said. I agree, she is. She's going to make a great attorney someday, I think, Liz added. I think you're right. He stood and helped Liz clean up the dinner table, rinsing the dishes before putting them in the dishwasher. Liz looked like she was about to start crying. Are you all right? He asked, taking her in his arms. It's just been so long since I've had a man in the house, she said. He held her as tears fell down her cheeks. It's been a long time for me as well, he said. Liz kissed him on the lips before pouring them each a glass of wine. They sat on her couch and continued talking. So what's next? She asked. Well, your brother and I are going to keep digging to see what we can come up with. If my hunch is right, Silva will take care of Robert for us, he said. So, you know Ben is my brother? She asked. Yes, he just informed me, John said. I suppose I should have told you earlier, but I wanted to get to know you a bit better first, Liz said. I owe your brother a debt of gratitude I'll never be able to pay, John said. He's the one who looked out for me when all this first started 10 years ago. I understand, Liz said. He's helped me out a lot as well. I couldn't have made it through my divorce without him. Changing the subject, do you think Silva might have your brother murdered? I don't know, John said. I know he's feared for a reason. At the very least, he can ruin Robert and maybe even my father. I'll do what I can, she said. My editor has given me the green light to go after Robert, but I have to be careful. I don't want it to look like a vendetta, and I certainly don't want to put anything out that could open the paper up to a lawsuit. Is it possible to use the videos from 10 years ago? John asked. Maybe. We obviously can't print the video in the paper, but we can use them on the website, and we can print screenshots from them. I would have to be very careful about how they're presented. Let me run that by my editor first. I'll do that tomorrow, but I think we should build up to it with some of the other things we have. Good, if your editor goes along with it, I think it'll put an end to Robert's career. He looked at his watch. I think I need to tell my daughter good night and head home. Thank you for the lovely dinner. Liz wrapped her arms around John and kissed him passionately. He returned the kiss, feeling his manhood begin to react. She noticed and smiled. Maybe someday you can stay and have dessert, she said. I'd like that, he said. They broke their embrace as Jenny walked into the room. Okay, too, Jenny said. I swear I can't take you guys anywhere. John stood and kissed Liz goodnight, then hugged his daughter. Good night, princess, he said. I'll see you tomorrow night, okay? Okay, Dad, she said. Sleep tight. The next day, John continued his campaign of texts and calls to Robert and Lydia, which he knew was driving them further over the edge. He copied all the videos he had onto DVDs for Liz and Jenny, which took up most of the day. He didn't realize how many incriminating videos he had of them until he tried putting them all together in chronological order. That night at dinner, he handed the discs to Liz, who couldn't believe the volume of what he had given her. I talked to my editor today, and he wants me to pursue the infidelity angle first and then possibly use that as a segue into the other stuff, Liz said. You've already given me plenty of evidence to back it up, and if Robert threatens to sue, we'll bury him with everything we have. Sounds good, John said. When will this happen? Read tomorrow's paper. I have a feeling the shit is going to hit the fan, she said. John smiled. I can't wait, he said. Sure enough, news of Robert and Lydia's infidelity led the news, with all of the morning shows talking about Liz's article. An article in the Los Angeles Times accuses state Senate candidate Robert Wilson of having had an affair with the wife of his brother, slain police officer Avery Wilson, the news announcer said. According to the article, video obtained by the paper shows the officer's wife engaging in sexual activity with both Robert and his father, current Superior Court Judge Daniel Wilson. Obviously, we cannot air that video here, but screen captures published by the paper show all three in an unfavorable light. Eyewitness News and other outlets were given a screening of the video, and we can confirm that it does show the three engaging in sexual activity. The article further states that divorce papers filed by Officer Wilson named both Robert and Daniel Wilson and alleges that his wife Lydia was involved in an adulterous relationship with the two men. We reached out to Judge Wilson but have not received a comment as of this broadcast. Robert Wilson has previously denied any such relationship, and attempts to contact Mr. or Mrs. Wilson have been unsuccessful. According to the article, the videos also included references to a crime syndicate on the East Coast. Wilson's firm was under investigation for ties to organized crime at the time of these events. Federal authorities have said they were unable to conclusively connect the firm to the mob. Officer Wilson was gunned down in his home just a few days after serving his wife with divorce papers, the announcer said. We have also been told additional information about that shooting may be forthcoming in the next few days. Stay tuned. Elated, John opened his paper. He usually didn't read the paper, but he had to read the article. There it was, in black and white, with blurred photos from the video. The article was quite lengthy and detailed as much of the affair as possible. It also discussed the mob connections and hinted that the shooting may have been planned. He was jumping for joy when his phone rang. Smith, he said, answering the phone. Did you read the article? Liz asked. Just finished it. That was great, he said. I'm glad you liked it. I'm being bombarded with calls right now. Everyone wants to talk about the article, so dinner may be a bit late tonight. No problem, he said. I'll go see Jenny and we'll fix you dinner tonight if that's okay. That's more than okay, she said. Bye, see you tonight. After he hung up, his phone rang again, but this call was coming from a number marked private. He wondered who might be calling him and accepted the call. Smith, he said. Good morning, Mr. Smith said, a man with a heavy New York accent. John recognized it as belonging to Tony, the man Robert spoke to earlier. "Who is this?" John asked. "What do you want?" "Listen carefully, Mr. Smith," the man said. "There will be a black sedan pulling into your apartment complex in the next few minutes. 2 men will come to your door. They have been instructed to escort you to meet my boss. You have nothing to fear so long as you follow their instructions to the letter. Am I clear?" "You're clear," John said. The call ended, and John called Ben to let him know what had just happened. "I don't think you're in any danger," Ben said, "but just in case, turn on your phone finder app the way I showed you, and I'll keep an eye on you. Call me as soon as you can. I think Silva's people are getting ready to deal with Wilson. Do as they say, and you should be all right." John followed Ben's advice, and as soon as he had turned on the app, he saw a large black sedan pull into the apartment complex. A minute later, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to see 2 very large men wearing suits and sunglasses. He also noticed their sidearms sitting in shoulder holsters under their jackets. "Come with us, Mr. Smith," one of them said. John nodded and followed them to the car. They put a blindfold on him before helping him into the back seat and searched him for weapons. They found his cell phone and took it from him. The door was closed, and he heard the men get into the front seat. He decided to play it cool and stay quiet as they drove. He counted the seconds in his mind, making note of the turns, hoping to get some idea of where he was going. After about 45 minutes, he felt the car stop. The men got out of the car and opened his door. One man held his upper arm as they walked away from the car. He heard a metallic door open and he was guided inside. After the door closed, the men removed his blindfold. As his eyes adjusted to the darkened room, he saw a man with a medium build approach him. The man offered his hand, so John accepted it. "Mr. Smith, I'm so glad you could join us," the man said with a smile. "My name is Mario Silva. Perhaps you may have heard of me. Please, walk with me." John followed him as he went into another room. Shackled to the wall was Robert, Lydia, and Dan. They sat on the cold concrete floor in their underwear and looked genuinely frightened. Their feet were spread before them and chained to staples in the concrete, and their hands were chained above their heads. "There's some people here I thought you'd like to see one last time," the man said. "I'm sure you know Mr. and Mrs. Robert Wilson and Superior Court Judge Dan Wilson." "Yes, I know them," John said. They all looked up at him, their eyes begging for mercy. "Avery?" Robert asked weakly. "Is that really you?" "No," John said. "Avery's dead. You murdered him 10 years ago, remember? You and the 304, he added, looking at Lydia, who had tears in her eyes. "In fact, all 3 of you plotted to murder him. I guess your chickens have finally come home to roost, haven't they?" JN looked at one of Mario's men and noticed he carried a taser. It had electrodes that needed to be placed on the skin to work. He looked at Mario. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the taser. Mario looked at him, then at the taser. He smiled and motioned for the man to hand it over. John took the taser in his hand and looked back at Robert. He noticed that Robert's boxers were open just enough to expose his genitals. He bent down and whispered in Robert's ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is for molesting Jenny, you worthless piece of," he said, putting the electrodes on Robert's tool and pressing the trigger. Robert screamed as the taser burned into him, causing him to convulse in agony. John stood up and looked down at Robert. "And this is for your brother's wife," he said before kicking Robert as hard as he could in the groin, causing him to scream again. He bent down and addressed Robert. "I just want to know one thing," he told Robert. "Why?" Robert looked at him for a minute before answering. "Because it was fun," he said weakly. John stood up and looked at Robert for a moment. Then he kicked Robert in the groin again. "You know you're right," John said. "This is fun." He kicked Robert in the groin one more time. "Are you having big fun now, Eliha?" He looked down at Lydia and shook his head. I was always taught never to hit a woman, he said. Avery loved you with all his heart, and how did you repay him? By screwing his brother and his father, and then plotting to murder him? And then you let this a-hole molest your 13-year-old daughter. What kind of a monster are you? You're not worth the effort. He moved on to Dan. And you swore to uphold the law, but you don't even know what the law is, do you? You screw your son's wife, and then you plot to have him murdered. You're a bigger piece of than Robert, you know that? He stood back and kicked Dan in the groin as well. To hell with you, to hell with all of you. He stood up and handed the taser back to Mario's man, thanking him. Then he turned to Mario. Is there anything else, Mr. Silva? He asked. Mario shook his head. No, he said. I just thought you might like to say goodbye. John looked at the three people shackled before him. Goodbye and good riddance, he said. He looked at Mario before continuing. You know, I actually thought about killing them myself once, but I made a promise I wouldn't cross that line. And I'm a man of my word. Mario nodded his head before motioning John away. I know that about you, Officer Wilson, he said quietly. John looked at him, surprised. Oh yes, I know who you are. I also know your daughter is attending UCLA this fall. She wants to be a prosecuting attorney. John said, and I'm sure she'll be a good one. Mario said, don't worry, John. I don't have a problem with honest prosecutors doing their job. I have attorneys who take care of those matters for me. I do, however, have a problem with people who double-cross me, as these three will soon find out. And like you, I too am a man of my word. I'm also a devoted family man. You've been given a gift most of us would never get, a real second chance at life. So please, take care of your daughter, be a good man to Miss Johnson, and live a long, happy, and healthy life. He extended his hand to John, who accepted it. Via con Dios, my friend, Mario said. Thank you, John responded. You do the same, Mr. Silva, Mario smiled. Please, call me Mario, he said. All my friends do. JN nodded his head. Mario. Mario smiled as he nodded his head. He motioned for the two men to take John home. They obeyed, blindfolding him again and leading him out to the car. A little less than an hour later, the blindfold was taken off, and John was handed his phone. One of the men handed John a large bottle of brandy. A token of Mr. Silva's appreciation, one of the men said. Please express my gratitude to Mr. Silva, John said. The men nodded their heads before leaving. John watched to make sure the sedan left and sat down at his table. He pulled out his phone and noticed his hand was shaking. He grabbed a cup of coffee and stepped out on the balcony to light up a cigarette, hoping to calm his nerves. After he had settled down a bit, he called Ben. John, are you okay? Ben asked. I lost all signals from your phone. Yeah, I'm okay, John said. He recalled his encounter with Mario and the three cheaters who destroyed his life. That explains a lot, Ben said. I lost all signal from their house. It's almost as if they jammed all the electronic signals before they nabbed Robert and Lydia. It's probably a good thing you got Jenny out of there when you did. I agree, John said. They ended the call, and John finished his cigarette, staring out over the balcony. About 5 o'clock that evening, he went to Liz's apartment and knocked on the door. Jenny answered and let him in. He hugged his daughter tight. Dad, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I'm just so glad to see you, he said. Well, I'm glad to see you too, Jenny responded. Liz called and said she's probably going to be quite late. What do you think about just calling out for some pizza? Pizza sounds good to me. I brought a deck of cards. You want to see if you can beat the old man in a game of spades? Jenny smiled, remembering the card games she used to play with her father when she was younger. I've had lots of practice since the last time we played, she said. He pulled out the cards. Well, let's see what you've got, he said. They grabbed a notepad and a pencil, sat at the table, and played spades until Liz called. John answered the phone, observing that it was now 9 o'clock and they had been playing for more than 3 hours. "Hi, John," Liz said when he answered. "Have you seen the news?" "No, Jenny's been beating my pants off at spades," John said. "What's going on?" "You'd better turn on the news," she said. "It looks like Silva has taken care of Robert and Lydia. I'm sorry, but I've been doing interviews all night, and I'm going to be stuck here for at least another couple of hours covering this story. Can you guys handle dinner on your own?" "No problem," John said. "We were thinking about calling out for pizza." "Pizza's perfect." "I'm sorry, John. I'll be home as soon as I can," she said. "I understand." "We'll be here," John said. "Thanks for letting us know." He ended the call, then turned on the television and searched for the local news. He found a channel that was covering the story. This just into Eyewitness News, an announcer said. "The home of State Senate candidate Robert Wilson burned to the ground tonight. The bodies of 3 persons, 1 woman and 2 men, were discovered by firefighters. It's not known what started the fire, but authorities say they are investigating and have not ruled out foul play. It's believed the bodies included Mr. Wilson and his wife Lydia. Stay tuned to Eyewitness News for updates as they come in." Jenny gasped and collapsed in tears as the news came in. John was hurt as well, but more for his daughter than anything else. He held her as she sobbed, soaking his shirt with her tears. His phone rang, and he sat Jenny down before answering it. Seeing the call was from Ben, he asked, "Did you see the news?" "Yes, I did," John said. "Did you have any idea this was going to happen?" "No, I didn't," John said. "Were they alive when you saw them last?" Ben asked. "Yes, they were," John said. "I made Liz a promise, and I kept it." "Okay, I believe you," Ben said. "I'll let you know if I hear anything. Take care of Liz and Jenny." "I will," John said before ending the call. Jenny looked at him after he set his phone down. "Did you have anything to do with this?" Jenny asked through her tears. "No, I didn't," John said. "I made a promise to Liz. I admit I wanted them to feel some pain, and there was a time I would have killed them for what they did to you and I. But no, I had nothing to do with this." "You swear to me on a stack of Bibles?" she asked. "If that's what it takes," he said. "Have I ever lied to you?" "No, you haven't," she said. He held her as she mourned for her mother. John's phone rang again, and he saw the call was from Liz. "Hi Liz, what's up?" John asked. "Please tell me you had no knowledge of this," she said. "No, I had no knowledge of this," he said. "Good. I had to tell the police where Jenny is, and they'll be coming by soon. No doubt they're going to have some questions. I'll be leaving here soon, and we can talk when I get home, okay?" Liz said. Okay, John said. "How's Jenny?" Liz asked. "She's upset, naturally, but she'll be okay, I think," he said. "Okay, look after her, and I'll see you in a bit," she replied. "Sounds good. I'll go ahead and order the pizza," John said. They said their goodbyes and ended the call. John called a local Domino's pizza and ordered 2 large pizzas for them. He sat with Jenny until he heard a knock at the door. He answered the door and saw 2 large lapped officers, one of whom was Sergeant Taggart, an officer he worked with 10 years ago. "Is Miss Jennifer Wilson here?" the sergeant asked. "Yes," John said. "Please come in." The officers entered, with Taggart looking at him closely. "Who are you, by the way?" Taggart asked. "Smith. John Smith," he said. "I'm a friend of Miss Johnson's, and I'm here looking after Jenny. Do you have any ID?" Taggart asked. John nodded his head and pulled out his driver's license. Taggart looked at it carefully and handed it back to him. "Can you account for your whereabouts since about 5 o'clock this evening?" he asked. "Yes," John said. I left home about 5 o'clock and came straight here. I've been here with Miss Wilson ever since. He looked at the table, where the cards were still laid out. She pretty much wiped me out in spades this evening. Taggart looked at the table and nodded his head before looking back at John. You remind me of someone I used to work with a long time ago, Taggart said. Do you know the Wilsons? No, I don't, John said. Taggart nodded his head before turning to Jenny. Miss Wilson, he asked. Jenny looked at him, tears running down her cheeks. I hate to tell you this, but your mother, father, and your grandfather were killed in a fire at their home this evening, he said. Robert wasn't my father, she said. He was my uncle when my mother married him. I see, Taggart said. Would you mind telling us why you're here? She looked at John before answering. My uncle has been molesting me since I was 13. Miss Johnson found out and invited me to stay here until I start college in the fall. Taggart nodded his head in sympathy. Did you ever report this to anyone? He asked. Yes, I did, she said. Twice. But no one did anything, and my mother threatened me if I reported it again. Taggart had a shocked expression. He was surprised Lydia would let this happen to her daughter because he had known her for years, back when she was still married to her first husband. I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, both for your loss and for what happened to you, he replied. Jenny gave him a quick glance as her eyes hardened. Taggart knew that expression, he'd seen it a few times in her father prior to his murder. I'm not sorry they're dead, Jenny harshly uttered. I'm relieved they planned to kill my dad. Then she repeatedly allowed that scumbsucker to attack me. As she unloaded, Taggart listened to her. Miss Wilson, I get it. He gave her his card and said, I knew your father, and he was a damn good cop. Please don't hesitate to give me a call if there is anything I can do. A grief counselor's number is also provided. I advise you to make the most of it. He turned to face John. He said, Mr. Smith, if you really care about this girl, I really hope you get her some counseling soon, and walked out. Liz arrived a few minutes after the cops left, and then the pizza arrived. Jenny remained on the sofa, dabbing at her eyes. Liz hugged her and went into the kitchen to watch John cut the pizza. She sensed that he had a thought. He turned to Liz and Jenny after he'd cut and served the pizza. He said, we need to talk. After placing their pizza on the table, he beckoned them to come over. Liz said, what's going on, John? To start with, I swear to you both that I had nothing to do with the events of tonight. Liz, I'm a man of my word, I made you a promise. The folks at DVA got in touch with me early this morning. I have no idea where they brought me. When they drove in circles and put a blindfold on me, I saw Lydia, Dan, and Robert. I spoke with them, and I spoke strongly. I swear to you both that they were alive when I left, and I had no idea this was going to happen, even though I hit Robert. I only anticipated that Silva's people would treat them rough. Before they spoke, the girls gave John a quick glance. I believe you, John, Liz responded, and I appreciate your honesty here tonight. Jenny gave her dad a hug. She said, I believe you too, Dad. A small tear formed in John's eye before he spoke. Liz saw and shot him a curious glance. With tears streaming down his cheek, he said, there was a time when I wanted to kill them for what they did to me and for what they did to you, Jenny. I discovered that I've changed as a man over the past 10 years when I met you both again, Jenny and Liz. That man was capable of killing all three of them with ease and without effort, but that's not who I am anymore. Suddenly, something Silva said to me made sense. You spoke to Silva himself? Liz queried. John gave a nod of his head. I did, indeed. He told me that I had been given a unique gift, an opportunity to start over, a life with you, Jenny, and Liz. Liz, I'm not the same man I was 10 years ago. I apologize. He sobbed as Liz gave him a hug. No, you've changed, and you don't need to say sorry. 10 years on, you've improved as a man. Liz looked at John after they had hugged and sobbed for a while. You know, it's late and has been a long day. Why don't you spend the evening with us here? She inquired. Yeah, I can rack out on the couch, he replied. Jenny and Liz just shook their heads. Don't bring it up. I would like you to stay with me if your daughter is okay with it. Jenny grinned. Are you sure? John inquired. Yes, indeed, my dear. My bed has lots of space, but keep in mind that I'm a one-man woman, and I expect the same from my man, she remarked. John grinned. It's a deal, he planted a kiss on her lips. He gave Jenny a look. Are you okay with this? She answered, Oh, yes, Dad. I'm more than okay with this. After giving each other one last hug and finishing their pizzas, they went to bed. Liz was naked and wrapped around John's body when he woke up following a quiet night of making love. I think I can get used to this, he grinned to himself. Liz and John tied the knot 6 months later. Jenny was Liz's maid of honor and Ben was John's best man. Everything in life seemed to be going well. According to the autopsies, Dan, Lydia, and Robert all died from smoke inhalation. Investigators looking into the fire discovered that it began as a result of an electrical short in the historic wooden home. With the help of old legal books and stacks of paperwork that Robert and Lydia had accumulated over the years, the fire swiftly spread throughout the old home. Jenny attended UCLA, dividing her time between the university and the condo owned by her father. John didn't need to find employment, but he did go into business with Ben and became a private investigator. But there was one last detail he needed to attend to. One day, Jenny called to inform him that his mother, Barbara, was suffering from a terminal cancer that was making her dementia episodes worse. Barbara was at the hospital. The elderly woman was not expected to live very long, according to the doctors. John brought Jenny and Liz to say goodbye to her. He noticed his mother's condition as he entered the hospital room. She opened her eyes slowly and met John's gaze, tears streaming down her cheek. Avery, is that really you? She questioned clumsily. He took a seat beside her. She studied his face intently. I apologize so much for everything, Avery. Oh my God. Will you ever be able to pardon me? He took her thin form and gave her a hug. With tears streaming down his face, he whispered, My name is now John Smith, but yes, it's really me, and yes, I forgive you. As he held her, she started to cry. Before she started to feel fatigued, they held each other for a few minutes. He smiled at her as he laid her down. I'm grateful, John. Now I can pass away peacefully. Tired, she drifted off to sleep. A few weeks later, she passed away, but not before modifying her will to divide her substantial possessions equally between John and Jenny. John coordinated her funeral and buried her beside her spouse. John acknowledged Silva's accuracy after glancing at the 4 graves belonging to his former family. Yes, he had been given a unique gift, and he was going to make the most of his second chance at life. He was surprised Lydia would let this happen to her daughter because he had known her for years, back when she was still married to her first husband. I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, both for your loss and for what happened to you, he replied. Jenny gave him a quick glance as her eyes hardened. Tagger knew that expression, he'd seen it a few times in her father prior to his murder. I'm not sorry they're dead, Jenny harshly uttered. I'm relieved they planned to kill my dad. Then she repeatedly allowed that scumpsucker to attack me. As she unloaded, Tagger listened to her. Miss Wilson, I get it. He gave her his card and said, I knew your father, and he was a damn good cop. Please don't hesitate to give me a call if there is anything I can do. A grief counselor's number is also provided. I advise you to make the most of it. He turned to face John. He said, Mr. Smith, if you really care about this girl, I really hope you get her some counseling soon, and walked out. Liz arrived a few minutes after the cops left, and then the pizza arrived. Jenny remained on the sofa, dabbing at her eyes. Liz hugged her and went into the kitchen to watch John cut the pizza. She sensed that he had a thought. He turned to Liz and Jenny after he'd cut and served the pizza. He said, We need to talk. After placing their pizza on the table, he beckoned them to come over. Liz said, "What's going on, John?" "To start with, I swear to you both that I had nothing to do with the events of tonight." "Liz, I'm a man of my word, I made you a promise. The folks at DVA got in touch with me early this morning. I have no idea where they brought me. When they drove in circles and put a blindfold on me, I saw Lydia, Dan, and Robert. I spoke with them, and I spoke strongly. I swear to you both that they were alive when I left, and I had no idea this was going to happen, even though I hit Robert. I only anticipated that Silva's people would treat them rough." Before they spoke, the girls gave John a quick glance. "I believe you, John," Liz responded, "and I appreciate your honesty here tonight." Jenny gave her dad a hug. She said, "I believe you too, Dad." A small tear formed in John's eye before he spoke. Liz saw and shot him a curious glance. With tears streaming down his cheek, he said, "There was a time when I wanted to kill them for what they did to me and for what they did to you, Jenny. I discovered that I've changed as a man over the past 10 years when I met you both again, Jenny and Liz. That man was capable of killing all three of them with ease and without effort, but that's not who I am anymore." Suddenly, something Silva said to me made sense. "You spoke to Silva himself?" Liz queried. John gave a nod of his head. "I did, indeed. He told me that I had been given a unique gift, an opportunity to start over, a life with you, Jenny, and Liz. Liz, I'm not the same man I was 10 years ago. I apologize." He sobbed as Liz gave him a hug. "No, you've changed, and you don't need to say sorry. 10 years on, you've improved as a man." Liz looked at John after they had hugged and sobbed for a while. "You know, it's late and has been a long day. Why don't you spend the evening with us here?" she inquired. "Yeah, I can rack out on the couch," he replied. Jenny and Liz just shook their heads. "Don't bring it up. I would like you to stay with me if your daughter is okay with it." Jenny grinned. "Are you sure?" John inquired. "Yes, indeed, my dear. My bed has lots of space, but keep in mind that I'm a one-man woman, and I expect the same from my man," she remarked. John grinned. "It's a deal," he planted a kiss on her lips. He gave Jenny a look. "Are you okay with this?" She answered, "Oh, yes, Dad. I'm more than okay with this." After giving each other one last hug and finishing their pizzas, they went to bed. Liz was naked and wrapped around John's body when he woke up following a quiet night of making love. "I think I can get used to this," he grinned to himself. Liz and John tied the knot 6 months later. Jenny was Liz's maid of honor, and Ben was John's best man. Everything in life seemed to be going well. According to the autopsies, Dan, Lydia, and Robert all died from smoke inhalation. Investigators looking into the fire discovered that it began as a result of an electrical short in the historic wooden home. With the help of old legal books and stacks of paperwork that Robert and Lydia had accumulated over the years, the fire swiftly spread throughout the old home. Jenny attended UCLA, dividing her time between the university and the condo owned by her father. John didn't need to find employment, but he did go into business with Ben and became a private investigator. But there was one last detail he needed to attend to. One day, Jenny called to inform him that his mother, Barbara, was suffering from a terminal cancer that was making her dementia episodes worse. Barbara was at the hospital. The elderly woman was not expected to live very long, according to the doctors. John brought Jenny and Liz to say goodbye to her. He noticed his mother's condition as he entered the hospital room. She opened her eyes slowly and met John's gaze, tears streaming down her cheek. "Avery, is that really you?" she questioned clumsily. He took a seat beside her. She studied his face intently. "I apologize so much for everything, Avery. Oh my God. Will you ever be able to pardon me?" He took her thin form and gave her a hug. With tears streaming down his face, he whispered, "My name is now John Smith, but yes, it's really me, and yes, I forgive you." As he held her, she started to cry. Before she started to feel fatigued, they held each other for a few minutes. He smiled at her as he laid her down. "I'm grateful, John. Now I can pass away peacefully." Tired, she drifted off to sleep. A few weeks later, she passed away, but not before modifying her will to divide her substantial possessions equally between John and Jenny. John coordinated her funeral and buried her beside her spouse. John acknowledged Silva's accuracy after glancing at the 4 graves belonging to his former family. Yes, he had been given a unique gift, and he was going to make the most of his second chance at life. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.